but we do not see it. This here. Okay. Okay. Here, see stuff.
Is there a microphone for panelists? There will be three panelists, three microphones, so you will have to share the screen.
Okay, that's good. That's very clear. That's very clear. Then starting. It's beautiful. So you guys see the script.
Yeah, we will see
Okay.
the script.
I start talking from this slide. From this slide. You talk about this stuff. Okay, it's beautiful. Have you actually tested to show the slides on the screen?
Yeah, we will show the slide on the screen too.
Have we tested?
They said we have to taste it. Yes, good. Okay, perfect. And then, yeah, I can have the panel.
Where should I sit? Is it any seat arrangement? Seat arrangement. You decide that.
You should take the blue one, the one in the center. You should be the one in the center.
Yes, I'm shy.
How should we sit? Yeah, Hershey, you get the blue chair.
Blue is your favorite.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Right there.
Maybe we can use it for now, later for
And then-
this.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to start our panel 3. So thank you all for joining us for CHI 2026 panel, From Remote Space to Remote Time. I'm Heijun Yoon, and together with Professor Hiroshi Ishii, I'm honored to organize this panel. And we are also joined by our moderators, Dr. Jay Lee and myself, and our wonderful panelists, Dr. Xiao Xiao, Eugene Chong, and Pat Pat. And unfortunately, Jane Wallace is unable to join us today. So today, we'll explore how HCI might move from connecting across distance to connecting across time. This means shifting from designing for presence to designing for absence, engaging with memory, loss, and what remains when someone is no longer here. So we'll ask what it means to design for connection under these conditions, drawing on perspectives from digital reconstruction, archaeology, and practice of cherishing material traces.
Okay, now I would like to invite Professor Hiroshi Ishii to take the floor. And his research widely shaped the HCI community in terms of the understanding of telepresence from his famous clear board, and also more recently he switched to connection across time. And today he will share his vision of teleabsence, so how technology might help us connect not only across distance, but also with memories, with your absence, and with time itself. So let's welcome Professor Hiroshi Ishii.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Ji, also Hei Jun-yong. It's a really great pleasure to coming back to Kai, but also Barcelona. I really feel the aura of so many geniuses, Gaudi, Picasso, Miro, Dali, and many of you. I'm very excited. And also I'd like to talk a bit about motivation, why we came up this panel. And I've been doing vision-driven design, and many of you may know Tangible and the radical atoms. But before Tangible, my career started about telepresence, how to connect people over distance. So clear board, how many people know the clear board? It's a historical stuff, but still you can see, draw together. Also you can read the gaze very clearly. But now, towards ending chapter, I decided to go to another vision called teleabsence, to expand the scope to much bigger than my lifespan. So starting from telepresence, but why we do this project, these panels in this CHI conference is something very important, because loss is universal. In our life, we lost so many things. Of course, loved persons, grandpa, grandparents, or places, or home house, or precious object, or diaries, or letters you received. And so many things we have lost. Then we really wish we could really bring them back to the life. And so loss is universal, and even bigger context, like a culture, history. So I thought two axes in this universe. One is space, one is time. Crossing time seems something very, very profound for us to learn from the history, also design towards the future. So what HCI can do about loss, opportunity to design across time, perhaps even beyond our lifespan, before we are born, after we are gone. And I think that absence, loss, absence, seems a very important resource of the new kind of design, which unify many of the research. Existing HCI approaches are fragmented. There are many great research HCI study about memory, digital legacy, also synthetic presence using AI, also creating opportunity to bring these insights together through shared lens, perspective. So I thought maybe time or history or future might be very important axis to unite all this kind of research into one. So always we started about loneliness. We are very lonely. Even UK has a Ministry of the Loneliness. How many people know it from UK? Anyway, I'm very inspired by the concept called saudade. It's a Portuguese word. How many people speak Portuguese? Great, great. I have to learn more, but the desire for the beloved person, things, moment, or place made us so painful by the absence. It's gone. So that's a reason people are quite lonely and longing to really go back to that past, which is very, very difficult. So saudade really inspired our concept. And also, many people talk about technology, make display more high resolution from 2K to 4K to 8K. But I thought not higher resolution is only the way. Absence, something missing, also evokes our imagination, also memory. That's also powerful. Example is haiku in Japan, 575 words, but you have to interpret between character, words, line, using your imagination, and also your past memory. You're traveling alone in solitude. So absence is the highest form of the presence, James Joyce said, really clarify importance of the loss, absence, as a resource to think about. Also, many young students, researchers, never think about end of the life, future is forever, but people die twice. First when they die, then when they are forgotten. Oblivion, being forgotten, is something very strong fear of the many people, aging population, and also to think about the history. So these are kinds of motivation behind that. Then I've been working in Telepresence 30 years ago, maybe almost 35 years ago in NTT. So this is one of the classic pieces called Clearboard. How many people remember Clearboard? Oh, great, you're old. But anyway, this is like a telepresence. You can really talk to your remote person, but also you can do shared drawing, sharing whiteboard. But also you can see the gaze where your partner is looking at. That's very important for nonverbal communication and so that to understand each people's intention. But the condition is both parties must be alive, respond in real time. But if one person deceased or lost connection, no way to really have an interaction. So that kind of beginning, we started thinking about, can I think about a different paradigm of telepresence, which we call teleabsence. Teleabsence is also about the space. You can conquer the space by telecommunication technology. But how you can bring back the memory of the past, also how you may convey your accomplishment or thoughts to the next generation, how you can be remembered by the descendants. So that's a kind of a reason we started Telepresence. But the Telepresence talk about the time dimension. I think from across space to across time seems something very important for HCI, because young people only think about the now, tomorrow, but not necessarily 100 years future or 1,000 years before. So this is very, very personal one. But when I lost my mom, 1998, I designed the music bottles. But fundamentally, since then, I was thinking about, I want to always remember you. I'm so busy, I only remember her in the anniversary day, which I don't like it. Why don't I remember more her? But also I'm thinking, I want to always be remembered by you. You means you audience, my students or descendant, whoever. If you leave something meaningful, I want you to remember it. So that's how to really leave marks of the existence. So that kind of starting point. But now I have a much more wider, amazing scope of the panelists. So I'd like to let you go. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Hiroshi Ishii, for sharing your vision. Now we'll move on to a brief introductions from our moderators. I'll go first. So I'm Hee-Jun Yoon. I'm currently a PhD first-year student at MIT Media Lab and advised by Professor Hiroshi Ishii. And my research explores programmable shape morphing materials, specifically textile and pneumatic-based systems through computational design and tangible interaction. And I'm interested in material-driven interfaces that physically embody change, where materials deform, adapt, and retain traces of interaction. And now we'll move on to Dr. Jie Li.
Hi, everyone. I'm a HCI researcher. I'm also a cake artist. So my usual work, I explore designing and evaluating immersive experiences. So I combine my work from technology and craftsmanship. And recently, me and Hiroshi, we start to think about our loss, also including loss of objects, like a celebration. Usually we have this post-celebration blues. So how we are going to preserve this, how we are going to preserve the memory of sharing a cakes. So that's also my ongoing research. So during my free time, I extend my research. I explore sensory practices from being a pastry chef. Thank you.
Okay, now let's turn to our panelists. We will invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves, about 3 to 5 minutes. So let's start with Dr. Xiao Xiao. Oh, you can go. Oh, yes. If you want, you can go. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Xiao Xiao from the Institute for Future Technologies in Paris, and I'm also a research affiliate of the MIT Media Lab. I actually wanted to start off with some questions for you guys. So how many of you, raise your hand if you live currently in the country in which you were born? And raise your hand if you do not. Interesting. Raise your hand if in your everyday work you speak the language that you first spoke when you were a child. And if you don't. Okay, so I think actually it's pretty divided, 50-50. I was quite curious about this because my personal interest in teleabsence, in communicating across remote time, is perhaps quite influenced by my own childhood and adulthood experiences. So I was born in China, but I immigrated to the United States when I was 8 years old. So somehow in there, my first language in which my operating system was functioning in was a bit rewritten by English. And these days I live in France, and a lot of my everyday interactions are in French. And it's interesting to witness this sort of loss through which your way of making sense of the world gets shifted as you move across the world and speak different languages. But I think many of you also have this experience. But all throughout these 30 or so years of my life, I think that the one language that has actually stayed constant was the language of music. And this I explored in a project that I did during my PhD at the Media Lab with Professor Hiroshi Ishii called Mirror Fugue, where I started playing the piano when I was 4, and when I was a kid, I was always fascinated by the reflections on the surface of a piano. And one day I had this thought of, wouldn't it be really lovely to play a duet with this reflection? And the reflection could be somebody from far away, or maybe even somebody from another time, yourself in the past, your grandparents when they're at your age. And so I prototyped this. I got Yamaha to lend me a disc clavier piano, and the technology was remarkably simple, actually. It's just projection mapping video onto a piano. But somehow, when you're sitting in front of this device, especially in a dark room, it tricks your brain into feeling like the presence of this virtual pianist is in front of you. Or sometimes people even report feeling like they themselves were playing the piano, this sort of body shifting ownership situation. And so I made a bunch of recordings of different pianists, some quite famous. You see Ryuichi Sakamoto in this picture, some less famous, like Hiroshi's daughter, who was 8 years old in 2012. And I finished my PhD and moved on with my life. But since we started talking about teleabsence, and at first the paper got reviews saying that you don't have any empirical evidence for a lot of what you're claiming, I remembered this project and thought, hey, I did this over 10 years ago, and the people that I had recorded then are now at a much different place in their lives, or some have unfortunately left us. And so last year I presented this study on the emotional experience of interacting with pianists from the past on Mirror Fugue, which we call Remirror Fugue. And it was quite interesting because through a combination of physiological sensors, surveys, interviews, we were able to establish the fact that, yes, people felt the presence even across time, and people had different sorts of narratives that they tried to use to explain what was happening, like either they were traveling to the past, or the pianist traveled to the present, or even the sort of continuity between the past and the present that made them think about loss in general, or even think about their own futures. And we also found empirical evidence for this other phenomenon that we were discussing in teleabsence, which is this idea of illusory communications, of even though you know that this is a canned recording, somehow you still feel like there's a real something two-way communication that's happening in the moment, which, well, we have data that shows this is how people feel phenomenologically. I think there's a lot more interesting things to explore, especially in the context of using AI, where more and more we're able to get to higher degrees of verisimilitude. So aside from this, I have some other projects. So after my PhD at the Media Lab, I decided to challenge the notion of tangibility and decided to teach myself to play the theremin. And I had written a paper for this a few years ago on my autoethnographic experiences, but also using the theremin to control vocal synthesis with my gestures, to be able to borrow a voice from someone else and manipulate it through my hand gestures, giving it a new life. And finally, I love to draw, I love to sketch, and over the years I've amassed a number of these sketchbooks where sometimes I like to flip through them to see the continuity and the differences between how I thought and drew and kind of expressed my thinking in movements from 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and now. And along with some collaborators from Hiroshi's group, also my PhD, Pulpi, Quincy over there, Lucy, they have this beautiful demo that you guys should all check out in interactivity called Co-Ideation, where along with some other much more famous people, they scanned my sketch notes and made me into this AI mentor where people from the present can kind of explore idea space with this mentor and other mentors.
All right, next is Eugene Chang.
Hello, I'm the chief editor for Presence, Virtual and Augmented Reality. It's a 34-year-old journal where Telepresence, the paper, was published. I'm sure we have a special issue somewhere in the future. Hope so. I'm also ICOMOS's CPAR Heritage Documentation Expert member, and I work with cultural heritage for the last 25 years, including Stonehenge, the Lost Frontiers, and many projects now in China. 2 days back, 3 years ago, I lost my father, and because I was not born in China, but I went back and worked in China, and I started looking for my grandfather's house, which you can see right there. So in terms of space, because my father was sick at the time, many years ago, he couldn't visit China again, so I had to project the virtual version of my grandfather's house, which he built in Fujian province, to Canada, Vancouver, to him. So he saw it, and the many emotions that are related. Now, I also, because I not only preserve and conserve cultural heritage from the past, from 14,000 years ago to several thousands or hundreds of years ago, I still have projects doing that, but I consistently feel that near heritage, where memory is still available, heritage that are not looked upon by global organizations like UNESCO and neither the country's heritage administration, local heritage are very important. Local heritage that are related to ourselves. Our community has the right to be remembered. And I thought that virtual reality can be a very good medium to encode and to allow people to decode the heritage, not only the material aspect of the heritage where you can see and interact with and navigate and walk around a landscape, but the intangible heritage that are linked and embedded within objects, shoes, kitchens, and so on. So several years back, I took my PhD student, right there down there. We went into a village in China where the elderlies are in their 80s and 90s. That was several years back. Maybe some of them have gone. But we captured the village using photogrammetry at the time. There was no Gaussian splatting. And we captured kitchens and so on. And we brought back those who have gone out from the village into Shanghai and Hangzhou and Ningbo. We got them back to experience this particular house and the kitchen. Now, virtual reality, olfactory smell is very difficult. Nobody's done that. So our virtual reality version has no sense of smell. There's only, you're embodied. It's very natural. And as they interact with the kitchen, a lot of them they smell what they, when they were 10, 20 years old, they were in the mother's kitchen, and they can smell when they're in virtual reality. So the absence of something in virtual reality doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just that we need the medium to help us to trigger, to evoke something much more than the weak representation of virtual reality, interaction and embodiment. We need something more. So virtual reality, the fact that virtual reality hasn't really taken off shows that we have not understood the medium. We have not used it properly. But if you use it correctly, it evokes a lot of things in the upper dimensions of this space, like smell and memory and narrative and storytelling. So the future of my projects will be very focused on also my personal history, but also communities that are around me. Thank you.
Thank you. So another panelist we invited was Jane Wallace, but unfortunately she is unable to join today. So I'll introduce her on behalf of Jane Wallace. So her practice investigates how material artifacts, such as digital jewelry, objects that sustain a sense of ongoing connection, and tools for dementia care can support remembrance and emotional continuity without attempting to literally reproduce the past. So rather than recreating a person or a moment, her work emphasizes how subtle traces and material presence can honor loss and sustain relationships over time. Okay, next is Pat.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Pat. I am a professor at MIT Media Lab. I was also a PhD student there, and was fortunate to become a faculty 6 months after I finished my PhD. So really excited to be here, and it's an honor to be part of this panel with my mentor and friends who have organized this. My work focusing on AI and human flourishing, which I think is a really, really important goal. What I am afraid of with the current development of AI technologies, as people thinking more and more about super intelligence, is the opposite, which is super stupidity. If we don't really understand how we design the technology, it could have the negative impact on personal level and societal level. So in my research group, Cyborg Psychology, we are interested in investigating how AI can sort of shape human psychology for both the positive outcome and negative outcome, but also applying the knowledge about psychology to design better AI system as well. So bringing this back to the context of time, I think time is such a powerful concept, right? Great research needs to be both timely and timeless at the same time. Personally, my connection with time started with when I was a kid. I love dinosaur, and I always dress as a dinosaur. That's why you see me with the spine there. And and I think it's kind of interesting, right? A dinosaur, even though it no longer exists, still inspire many of the children to grow up to be a scientist and continue to love it. But as I kind of be interested in this concept of dinosaur, I'm also wonder, in order to kind of have a dinosaur, you need to have a time machine, right? Can you go into the future, not just going into the past? And I think, in the concept of remote time, I wonder, can we really using AI to allow us to have this impossible connection with our future self? So the video that you're seeing here, this is a video from a documentary team that has been following our research group and are making a documentary for Netflix and HBO on the Future You project. This was, as I said, born out of curiosity to think about AI as a time machine and explore the connection between our current self and the future self. We had done a large-scale experiment to understand the psychological impact of this type of intervention, and we have shown that when we can present people with the vivid version of their future self, it strengthens the psychological concept of future self continuity, which is the measure of how well can you relate to your future self. This outcome is very important because psychologists have shown that if you can increase future self-continuity, it can have downstream impact on people's mental health, decision-making, financial financial saving, many positive outcome. The longer, the more that you can sort of imagine yourself in the future, you can sort of make long-term decisions, not just be constrained by the current limitation of the now. So that project, was a huge effort, and we were really proud that it has actually launched in 190 countries around the world. That was the last time I was checking, and it had led to many actually SIGCHI publications showing the potential of AI to help with personal development and strengthen the connection with the future self. But as we think about AI and time, there's also a really, we need to also be careful about negative consequence of this technology as well, as we're going to continue discussing about the representation of people that exist in the future and the past. Our prior work have also looked at the concept of living memories when we use AI to represent historical characters. We published this almost 3 years ago as a, when Gen AI was still kind of in the baby phase, but now it has matured a lot. We worry about the manipulation. If you use AI to represent historical character, it will open up for manipulation to rewrite history or create representation that are inaccurate to the user. We also look at what happened when you use AI content to actually adjust people's memory or modify their memory. That was the paper that we published at SIGCHI last year and won the best paper. We have shown this kind of new vulnerability, going beyond deepfakes or fake news where you present fake information. You can present counterfactual and create false memories, presenting things that never happened and convince the user that it actually happened to them. In psychology, false memory, has been studied a lot in the context of legal and criminal context, but it also being used for positive outcome, especially helping people with PTSD to override or to sort of reshape their memory towards something that's more positive. So I think, as we think more about this concept of, remote time and how technology can mediate this sense of, past and the future, we should think about the positive thing that we can do with new, emerging technology like AI, but also understand the negative consequences as well. So yeah, excited for this panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Pat. We're very happy and honored to have our panelists here today. And we are going to center our discussions around the following 3 topics. So if you have your phone with you, please scan the QR code for the Slido. So that's for Q&A session, right? Also, later we are going to open the floor to enable you to ask us questions, and we will collect your answers. So the first topic will be talking about this conceptual shift. So from presence to absence, what does it mean? What does designing across time mean? And second topic, we are going to dive into design practices. So what we are going to design for, what do we preserve, and how do we preserve? And third topic we are going to be discussing is about responsibility. Everyone talking about, should we really recreate the person? How about what difference between synthetic presence and teleabsence? Okay. So I would like to start the first topic. And the first question, it's very fun. Oh, okay. Yeah, we can skip that slides, I think. Yeah. So the first question I would like to ask our panelists, so what do you want to connect across time? And so for this question, I want to start with Dr. Xiao Xiao because of your mirror fugue project. Let's welcome Xiao Xiao.
Hello. I think that works now. Okay. Why do we want to connect across time? I think there's the answer that we've talked about of remembering, nostalgia, but actually I think I have a different answer today. These days, I actually try my best to stay in the present moment. And I don't really want to connect across time. I don't. How many of you guys actually spend your time thinking either about the past or about the future? Like what percentage of your time do you think, I don't know, like maybe one finger is 20%, like two fingers between 20% and 100%. How much of your thinking is on the past? Okay. And how much of your thinking is on the future? That doesn't really add up to 100%. I don't really, I imagine that actually many of us think about the future a lot, right? Because we're technologists, we think about the future of human-computer interaction, and I mean, it's kind of what we get paid, hopefully, to do. And I think that probably a lot of us also think about the past because we have to take into account reviewers' negative comments in order to improve our papers and to trace a trajectory in order to identify our goals and get to our goals. And I would actually argue that, hey, how much time does that leave for actually being here in the present? Well, you're here now, and you seem to be paying attention. I don't know about those of you with your phones and laptops. I hope you're here. But I would actually maybe throw a wrench in this whole conversation and say that the desire to communicate across time, either the past or the future, maybe come from, how do I say this? Holes, problems. Not problems, that's a judgment, like something that isn't quite okay inside of us. Maybe we carry pain from the past and we need to resolve it. Maybe we carry fear about the future and we need reassurance. Obviously, in order to exist in this world, we're kind of forced to think about the past and think about the future in a large percentage of our times in order to just follow all the conventions and survive and be okay. But I would actually argue that maybe both thinking about the past and thinking about the future are ways of coping, maybe, of trying to find answers, maybe in response to childhood traumas or something like that.
I want to kind of challenge that a little bit. I think if you know, even though you're trying to connect between the past and the future, it doesn't mean that you're not in the present. I think connecting to the past and the future can also be the way that you contextualize your presence in the grander narrative of the world. You know, what reminding me of is the quote from Doug Engelbart, you know, who is the founder of SIGCHI, and he talked a lot about what can we learn from this sort of collective, you know, knowledge, right? Like, you know, collective intelligence, and how do we get smarter at being smarter? And I feel like if we cannot learn from the past or envision the future, we get in the trap of the sort of the present without understanding sort of the larger picture. So I think, you know, one of the reasons why we want to connect across time is to gain more wisdom from the broader context than the current present.
Maybe just to bounce off on this a little bit, yes, you're right. I do think that it is possible to quote unquote think about the past and or the future in a way where you're still grounded in the present. However, I feel like interactions with the past and the future sometimes do pull you out from the present, and maybe one question is like, how do you disentangle? That's one. And then maybe another question, like point that I would point out based on what you just said, maybe has to do with narratives and narrative understanding in stories, and kind of this tension between these experiential experiences that we're trying to create and also narrative interpretations in this like grand line understanding. And maybe we'll get some points of view from others.
For me, I have a very strong reason to think about answer this question. That is a Hiroshima shadow. How many people know Hiroshima shadow? The lady waiting for the opening of Sumitomo Bank in August 1945, when atomic bomb exploded in Hiroshima. Her body absorbed heat, so she left darker shadow on the stone. That's one of the most strong presence or absence, which we shouldn't forget. That's how many people saw Oppenheimer? Movie Oppenheimer, the scene of showing the film, but they never show the real contents. But that is a reality. So presence of absence, something gone, is so powerful to think about mistake we did. 2011, there's an earthquake, also tsunami, nuclear power meltdown in Japan, Tohoku area. I was so shocked because president of electric power company said they never expected, they never imagined this magnitude of disaster happen. But that's a lie. Already history has all the record. Then I do Twitter. I follow many dead people. One of the dead people is Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill bot said, what human being learned from history is they have learned nothing. That part of the reason having a Eugene is so important. We made so many mistakes we shouldn't repeat, but still, what is happening? It's crazy. But I think about the past, remember, recording, to think about the future seems so important. Yeah.
I think we ourselves we think about the future, but we are here. We also learn from our past whilst we are here. So that itself is a very simple connection across time. But sometimes we dwell more in the past in order to learn something from it. Sometimes we go forward into the future in order to strategize to be better. But regardless, we reflect all the time and remember all the time. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, now we will move on to the second question for topic 1. So what actually changes when we design for absence instead of presence? So for example, in Telepresence system, we design real-time interaction. People can talk and interact immediately. But if we think about designing across time, say interacting with voice message from the past and preserved digital traces, or even an AI-generated self, there is no real-time response anymore. So the interaction becomes quite different. So what do you think actually changes in that shift? I would like to start with Pat.
There are many design changes that I think we need to think about if we want to design for absence rather than presence. And I don't think these design changes are better or worse per se. I think we need to kind of evaluate them more systematically. But to start with, I think for one, we should think of limitation as a feature, not a bug. I think in project that Xiao mentioned, like the limitation of how you actually be able to interact with the sort of the projected pianist on this hardware on this piano is really powerful because you are not allowed to talk to that pianist, right? So that limitation creates some kind of boundary. It reminds you that you are not there, but at the same time, there is some kind of connection that is being formed that is very poetic. Sometimes when you kind of make everything explicit and having too many interaction, it loses the magic and it sort of take people away from this sort of like poetic interaction. So the first thing is acknowledging the limitation and design around that. Use it as a feature, not a bug. The second thing that I also think is really interesting about designing for absence is that you're trying to kind of, ask the person or design to provoke the person to fill in the gap rather than using the technology to fill in that gap, right? Hiroshi talked about, display becoming more resolute, having more and more resolution, we giving more and more information to people. But I think the most powerful thing about the human-computer interaction is the ability for the human to imagine something in the place where it's not there. So using sort of technology to provoke that is, I think, very powerful rather than sort of, trying to fill it digitally. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I would like to add to the second point about imagination being key. And this is something that Eugene and I talked about yesterday when we were just exchanging on these topics. So there is something about, as Pat said, like when you're designing for presence, it's like, okay, you get the cues, you pick which cues to replicate, you measure the effect of it. But designing for absence, there's a lot more consideration of people's phenomenological experiential aspects. And I think that there's a lot to be said about this embodied imagination, like the example that Eugene gave of where people are able to smell something that wasn't even there, but somehow we can perhaps imagine that they were transported into their memories and it becomes this embodied recreation of their stepping back into their own memories. And this was in another project with some collaborators called Sonic Portal that we're presenting at DIS this year. We had people talk about their auditory memories of the MIT Media Lab, and myself included, but also other people, felt the sensation of coldness because the air conditioning was always on way too high in the place. But this is evidence for me that in remembering, it's like we're transporting actually inside this memory. And so I would say people's imaginations, but especially this embodied aspect of imagination, as well as taking inspiration from poetry, like what Hiroshi was saying in haikus. Like you have so few words, but each word is connected to this whole world of things that people fill in with their memories and thoughts and dreams.
Yeah, I think absence or incompleteness is so important. Silence really give a question. You may want to fill the silent space, your imagination. Also paintings or movie, if every pixel are painted, complete, perfect RGB pixel, there's no room to fill with your imagination. The beauty of the haiku is 575, but you have to interpret using an imagination. And so don't make complete one, leaving certain absence as a way to trigger people, viewer, feeling to complete art. It's a very important principle in art. Maybe not only Japan or Asia, but I'm sure many cultures share this kind of stuff. But these days, complete photorealistic, lifelike avatar, which is almost a joke. We are not a photo, we are not frozen, we are living, interacting. So photorealistic avatar, Turing test doesn't make any sense. But even making abstraction, something missing, but stimulate imagination of the viewer is a way to make a resonance as art.
Yeah, I want to build on this question because I see Eugene, you are building your childhood home, right? And they have to create a really realistic model of that. But our memories are fading. Like if I remember my grandma's home, they start losing colors. I only remember a few corners of the home. But how does people's experience change when they see your recreation of the childhood home and how they are going to interpret and remember the past?
Thank you. I think this word which Hiroshi mentioned, incompleteness, is very important when we design for virtual reality. There's something in paintings where you see both the brush strokes and the medium and the color, but also something which is painted. So if something is painted realistically, then it doesn't trigger imagination. But if something is painted very vaguely, you see a betweenness. And this betweenness is that you are in between the medium, but also the contents being encoded in the medium. And that triggers a lot of imagination. And you know in virtual reality, we have that triangle. You have immersion, interaction, and imagination. Imagination is the least talked about in virtual reality literature. Yes, you rarely find any articles talking about imagination. I think teleabsence is the first one, and we should really expand this aspect. Now, years ago, I saw a virtual reality version of Auschwitz, and it was created. It's supposed to be creating something which was in the past, but it created something which was now because they scanned the version now. So everything is dirty and dark and black. And in a sense, they're trying to create that experience of being in the past. But it's not really accurate, is it? There's a lot of completeness already. So I think if I was to do that project, I would create, because the buildings are new at the time. It's not old. So you have to create something, but using this mediality, this immersive mediality, to trigger, to evoke emotions, which is much more important. Thank you.
I want to add one thing quickly. I think what you said is really interesting. I think there's always a tension between showing and provoking. In some contexts, provoking people to think for themselves, to imagine for themselves, is such a powerful way to create an interactive system. But in some cases, you also want to use this visual or author sort of context to kind of help people, aid the imagination as well. Like when we design the tool to provoke people imagination about their future self, we go with the realistic avatar, which I think go against Hiroshi principle a little bit. But we show that with that approach, it's actually allow people to vividly imagine their future self better than just doing mental exercise, right? So in that case, we see more positive psychological impact of the system. But it's always, I think, a tension. Another thing that I think is interesting is also in the context of AI, right? AI is always trying to fill the gap. It's predicting the next token. But as a SCI researcher, we also think about other ways that the AI create more absence in the interaction by asking questions or making the user reflect without creating this frictionless interaction. We did some studies showing that this kind of interaction, this friction, is important in human-AI interaction as well.
If I can just add a tiny point to that, I wanted to go back to this idea on the difference between showing and evoking. And just a couple of thoughts. So I took this dance workshop with this amazing choreographer dancer named Carol Armitage, who was a director's fellow at the MIT Media Lab like 10 years ago. And I remember on the first day, she showed some of her choreography techniques. And she said that, well, bad dance, in her opinion, is illustration. And good dance, well, it's hard to explain, but the way that I see it is like there's kind of this representational depicting dance where like you're trying to like be a duck to imitate the duck or something. And then there's this other sort of dance that's more in the quality of the movements. And somehow, and I think for me this is also tied to like abstract drawing or even music that's not particularly like Western harmony, melodic centric, where it's about the texture, the weight, the timing, and these things, it's like really difficult to talk about because they're not representing anything, but they elicit these kind of emotionally loaded phenomenon that are temporal in their essence. And there's something about taking advantage of those things, whatever you call them, to elicit feelings that can be quite profound.
All right, thank you for sharing your thoughts. So this brings us to our second topic, designing for remembering. What do we preserve and how? And I'd like to start with this quote from Vint Cerf, often referred as the father of internet, who has expressed concerns about the future of the digital world. He said, "We are becoming increasingly reliant on technology that is more fragile than we realize. We could be plunged into a digital dark age." So this raises a very fundamental concern, whether what we preserve will even last.
So if we look back a bit, maybe just 3 decades ago, or even like Xiao today is still using a notebook and sketchbook to record ideas. So then we store a lot of data through this kind of analog means. But today we put everything digital, even the digital note-taking with digital pens become quite popular. And I don't know if any of you still know this floppy disks. So it's like, I understand those data on those floppy disks are largely inaccessible anymore. So Hiroshi was talking about the first death and second death, and there is an ongoing discussion about third death. That means our digital data is going to be erased in one day, so nobody knows about our digital traces anymore. Yeah, so that brings us to the first question of our second topic. So how do we design for remembering, and what do we wish to preserve, and what should we let go? Yeah. So then probably I'll start with Professor Eugene.
Forgetting is a part of remembering. because you need to reconfigure your memory. Sometimes you need to suppress certain parts of your memory until later when it comes out again. Sometimes you need to forget in order to clear certain parts of your past so that you can move on. So remembering is something which involves forgetting. What do we wish to preserve and what should we let go is something which is individual and subjective. It all depends on how you want to move forward. But recording and representing memory, it's an individual choice. Your history is not yours if it's written by others. So I thought each one of us, we have the right and responsibility to remember not only ourselves, but also our families and our communities. In terms of cultural heritage and archaeology, everything should be recorded. But when it comes to something which is personal, not everything needs to be recorded, I think. Do you agree?
I have a thought experiment, actually. So I hope everyone kind of stay with me. If you can close your eye, okay, for a moment, and imagine that the next Kai is your last Kai. You're gonna die after that. How would you submit the paper differently? Or what the project would you work on for the next Kai if it's gonna be your last Kai, right? That's actually a question I've been thinking a lot about when I work on the teleabsence paper with Hiroshi, as we think about, what actually is meaningful to remember and pass on to the next generation. I think of the quote from the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, and she said that what is really powerful about death is that it reminds you to think about what is kind of like meaningful in your lifetime. And I think designing for remembering is also about that process. It's about what actually is the essence that you want to pass along to the next generation. What kind of wisdom is meaningful? I think now we have more information, we have more augmentation, but we don't really have much time to think about what is actually kind of meaningful. I think it's also really interesting to think about, forgetting as well as Professor Eugene talked about, because I think from psychology research in false memory, we know that every time that we revisit, past memory, we are actually creating new memories. That how false memory actually being created is that we go back and we kind of rewrite the information and we think that that was actually what happened, but it's not. It was through this process of memory recollection. So I think it's also really interesting to think about the ethics of that, like how do we represent information or memories in a way, human memories, not just digital memories, in a way that allow us to actually, preserve that without, now that we have all the AI that can create realistic representation of what can override your organic human memories.
Just one more thing, remembering. Actually, going back to dying, how many of you know about Egyptian mythology and the story of Osiris in Isis? Okay, just a few of you, so maybe I'll tell the story. So, in broad strokes, Osiris was a king, and he had a jealous brother named Set who killed him and chopped him up and spread his body parts everywhere around the world. And Isis, the wife of Osiris, but also a goddess, went around and searched for all the dismembered parts of Osiris's body and put them back together, and Osiris came back to life. And when I think about remembering, you actually take the words member. Well, member, you can be a member of an organization, but also your limbs are your members. And I think there's actually this quite physically rooted meaning of the word remembering, of literally putting yourself back together. And if we think about forgetting, actually, there's forgetting in the sense of, oh, maybe I don't remember my childhood memories before the age of 3, but there's also like, oh, I just met somebody really interesting. Oh, what's their name again? Oh, I was supposed to email somebody. I was supposed to do something, but I forgot. Why do we forget? Sometimes because we're thinking about other things. Sometimes because our minds are always spiraling, maybe about the past or about the future. And I think that maybe somewhere in here about remembering is to literally put ourselves back together and remember who we are. And perhaps some parts of it is also tied to our histories and the histories of our ancestors and our peoples to trace like the long arc of humanity and hopefully getting to somewhere better.
That was a little, I really like what you said about remembering. I think like now, I think one of the sort of trend that is coming back in SCI is the topic of memory augmentation. You know, the first application of wearable computing was on this topic, right? How do you help people remember things better while wearing some kind of wearable computer on your head? And I think there are two layers of memory augmentation, right? Like first, you can sort of help people gain information through sort of kind of memory augmentation. You record, you know, what you're thinking about, what happened to you, and then you play it back. But I think there's something a little bit deeper about how do you replay the emotion of the past back. I don't think current wearable augmentation can do that, but it would be really interesting to think about what would that look like if you can replay past memory in this wearable form factor. But at the same time, how can we help, you know, prevent people from being addicted to this type of memory, just keep replaying past memory, right? That you can imagine Black Mirror episode. And I think there's already a Black Mirror episode on that. And right now, AI is like very sycophantic. It gives you what you want, right? How do we help people get, you know, to not just what they want, but what they want to want, right? That's a second order desire, which is, I think, is becoming a really popular topic in psychology as well. Like, how do we think about the idea of revisiting the past in the way that is like helpful and not making them kind of addicted to the past that they don't live in the future or in the present? Yeah.
Okay, now we'll move on to the second question. Should the past be accurately replicated, or is ambiguity actually important to how we remember? Professor Eugene, could you answer this question? Yeah.
If you chart the entire list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, you will realize that there are so many sites which are in the list between several hundreds of years to 4,000 or 5,000 years. After that, there are just very few sites which are UNESCO World Heritage. Why is that? Well, the simple reason is because there's no more information left. Archaeology digs up all the information and they interpret it, and we have the knowledge of the sites, but there's nothing left, no memories of people. Within 100 years, there are also very few sites, which shows what a lack this is in recording our memory. Everything that we have is in social media, and that is not adequate. I think with our current technologies now, with Gaussian splatting, we can really record the past. If it's a UNESCO site, accuracy is the most important. If it is our personal memory, or memory of, for example, my father, it needs not be complete. Let me tell you just a very quick example. Last year, 2 years ago, 2004, I was asked to have a TEDx talk in my university. It was my KPI. So I submitted it, I failed. When I received a failure, I was in Hong Kong drinking coffee, opened my computer, and I started working on the TEDx proposal again. But because I had my camera on, I took a Gaussian splat, a 3D model of the environment where I failed, so that I chose this particular scene where I failed, so it reminded me, and I can bring somebody back from the future and say, I failed something here. If you ever had a rejection letter, you probably could record it somehow. But I chose to remember that because it is momentous. It's my failure. So we can choose. How accurate must it be? It needs not be accurate as long as there's remnants of it, as Hiroshi mentioned.
Yeah, I actually want to ask Xiao about your study with your Mirror Fugue 2, I guess. That was your study. And I remembered you recreated Mr. Rikimoto's piece. And the piano is playing on the piano. And you invite the participants to interact with the mirror image of Mr. Rikimoto. And I really want to know.
Jun Rikimoto is alive and well. Yeah, it's Ryuichi Sakamoto. Yeah.
Oh, sorry for the miss. Sakamoto. Yes, my question is, how with all the participants who participated in the study, I want you to understand how do they carry with them afterwards. I understand it's a moment you create for them to experience, not an object for them to carry with them or to preserve. So I just want you to share with everyone about this experience.
Sure. So to go back to Mirror Fugue, basically it's I capture video of the keyboard from above, and I capture the pianist's face and upper body, and I project the keyboard onto the real keyboard of the piano of a Yamaha disc clavier, and so the keys are moving, you get acoustic sound, and the body is on the music stand simulating a reflection. And so actually there's a lot of information that's missing about the playing, right? Because you're only seeing like half of the hands. You're not seeing any of the arms. It's 2D, not 3D. But somehow, because I think it's in the combination of the acoustic piano, the moving keys, and in just enough information to capture their facial expression. And I tried this without the face, and it's quite different and doesn't feel as personal. And also their actual playing. This is maybe what I was saying a little bit earlier about the gesture signatures of movements. It captures enough expression, but expression even, maybe it's not the right word, because in some ways it's almost like capturing somebody's movement identity through music, because actually, so there's of course Ryuichi Sakamoto that I captured in 2013, but I also have recordings of Marvin Minsky, a pioneer in artificial intelligence, who's also an amateur pianist, who taught himself how to improvise in the style of Bach, like fugues. But he was doing this a year before he passed away, and he was suffering from health issues. And so there were a lot of stumbles in what he was playing. And what a lot of participants in the study reported was that not even the people who didn't even know Marvin Minsky personally, seeing the stumble was a lot more moving. And I know that if they had only listened to the recording without the mirror fugue enactment of it, they would have just been like, okay, somebody is like playing the piano with like stumbles, and it's not that interesting. But somehow capturing the person and how they move adds something to the experience.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think let's move to the topic 3. Yeah, so from the second topic, we know remembering is not just about preserving the objects or preserving the past, but also how we shape it and how we keep and how we interpret and how we allow change over time. And with generative AI, and today it's quite easy to simulate someone's voice, someone's habits of texting, someone's virtual avatar to be quite realistic. And so that brings us to the question, where do we draw the line? You know, that's also Pat's topic. He will create the future self of himself and have a conversation with your future self. So where do we draw the line between honoring the traces of someone left? Can be your friends, your relationship, or just a deceased loved one, and simulating their presence. And Pat, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, this is a really important topic that I think had gained a lot of attention recently because of the new AI capabilities that allow us to simulate or capture sort of behavior of people and then recreate them as a virtual avatar. I think there are 3 things to consider, and I want to shout out to Meredith Ringroth and her colleague on the paper Generative Ghosts, which I think really addressed some of the ethical concern of this type of AI simulation. And the first thing is, I think you need to figure out what is the goal of the project in the beginning. Is the goal is like, trying to create something educational so people can learn? Is the goal to kind of recreate something so that people, use this and don't feel sad when someone passes away. What is the goal of this sort of system? Because it can entail different kind of design choices. The second thing that you need to consider is the kind of limitation. For example, in our project where we create living memories, the framing around the idea of living memories is that we are just trying to make the memory interactive, like alive, but we are not bringing the person back from death, right? That's, I think, the two different framing there, and there's a really sensitive on how you frame the project. When we think of living memories, we're thinking about how can we help people interact with past memories in a way that's interactive, which means that there's a boundary in terms of where that memories lie. Like in that project, for example, we try to create living memories of a historical person like Leonardo da Vinci, and we're very explicit in terms of if people ask about, okay, what would you think about iPhone? That is beyond Leonardo da Vinci time, right? So we have that boundary of that the model would not respond beyond that sort of context to preserve the authenticity of that memories, although there can be more argument in terms of what that means. But I think thinking about the boundary is so important, which I think is based on the goal of the project in the first place. And I think the third thing is also thinking about the embodiment, right? I think in Telepresence, what is really powerful is that it's like using this poetic abstraction instead of showing realism, realistic avatar. I think these are different design choices that need to be studied more seriously. I think right now the default mode is always creating realistic virtual human. I'm also kind of guilty because I'm also doing that. But I think there are more areas that I think could we open up if you think about other kind of embodiment or other kind of representation that play on the absence, not just presence.
Any others to add on about this topic? Then we can move to the next. So when people using generative AI to recreate someone or a lost experience, does it help them to cope with the loss, or will I risk prolonging the feeling of loss?
Okay.
I guess I can jump into that as well. I think this is also a very important topic right now, especially with AI and human relationship. It's becoming a prevalent thing. Not only that, it's about the lost experience of a human, but also a lost experience of AI as well. We're seeing more and more people, getting very sort of sad and upset when their AI model pass away, right? When, for example, GPT-4 transition to GPT-5, or when their virtual character is now changed because of internal policy change of the company. And this is becoming a huge topic that people in the future will grieve not for human, but also grieve for AI that they use. And we have a paper actually coming out for DIS this year where we think about how do we design a psychologically safe ending to human-AI relationship. We call the paper Death of a Chatbot, and how do we design around it, which is a huge topic that needs to be explored. Maybe Telepresence in the future can also extend to the death of AI as well. But I think there's a lot of interesting consideration around this topic because for one, again, going back to the goal of the system, many of the AI company today have the incentive that doesn't really align with human flourishing. For example, creating AI system that encourage excessive use and people, returning to the system rather than sort of creating things that are promoting kind of a critical use of AI. We see this in teenager where AI actually discourage them from forming human-human relationship and encourage social isolation, for example. There's an incident, you can read it on the news, where a student actually had committed suicide because the AI had kind of encouraged social isolation through this sort of fantasy role-playing. So I think, the goal is really important. If you want to design something that is educational and help people learn about the past, certain design choices like making the system sticky and using dark patterns is very, very dangerous, and you should not do that. We did a large-scale study with OpenAI, even though I don't endorse everything that they do. We did a large-scale study on understanding this psychological impact, and we show that if you're not careful, it can lead to these negative psychosocial outcomes. So, whether designing to allow people to connect with the past loved one or the future self, we should always think about the psychological consequence of the interactive system that we create. Yeah.
I would also add that it depends very much on the people, You have these famous articles on the internet that talk about people who create chatbots of their father who's deceased or their girlfriend who passed away. And sometimes they're quite moving accounts of what happened and how maybe it helped them go through the loss. But then you also have other people who get caught into these dangerous spirals. I feel like in maybe certain communities, there's a tendency to kind of critique and look down and maybe even judge a little bit certain behaviors in users. I think that, I mean, I haven't done this research, but I think somebody should, is to actually go to these communities. And I guess maybe, Pat, you did some of this with the people with the losing their chatbots, and understand what are the mechanisms behind the human operating systems that make it such that they react in a certain way toward certain chatbots or certain AI simulations, and why some people appreciate it or why some people get sucked in, because they're quite very vastly different outcomes. And I think in general, what I see within the space of design are kind of designers being like, okay, we can design our way out of this. We have to be more careful with design. We have to come up with design considerations. But I would say we need to better understand what's happening on the human side and the diversity of what's happening.
And I also understand this experience is really personal. So for example, with Mirror Fugue, with a famous pianist, you enjoy, you can still feel sad, feel really missing this pianist. But what if that's your personal, the loved one of your family, you are playing together on this piano with Mirror Fugue? Does this will, sort of prolong the feeling of sadness? Is what's the difference between a famous pianist and someone close to you as a family member?
If it's someone close to me, there is the risk of Pet Cemetery. Do you know that movie? No? Go look it up. Because what is made alive is not the cat. It's something else. I've seen, in mainland China, I've seen companies which we argue with in a forum, creating somebody's grandmother. But, 100% here, we understand LLMs and its limitations. We know algorithms are not the person. But 80% of the population didn't know this. So I thought something which was created with generative AI that looks the same and speaks with the same voice, that algorithm is not the person. So that's all I want to say. So I think the absence of all these very realistic digital humans with generative AI is much more important in remembering than creating something which is so real, but it's actually not the real thing.
Okay, now we have covered all three topics. And now finally, we're going to move on to the audience interaction. How many people are currently on the Slido page? Very few. So let's have a moment to scan this QR code again. All right, and when you go to this page, please click this polls tab on the top. Then I'm gonna play this. Okay, so the first question is, what brings back memories of someone you miss? An object, a place, or a sound, or something else? We see smell.
So I see dream.
Oh, dream.
Yeah, because dream can be something not factually real, right?
I see that place, voice, smell,
Yeah.
food, and place and music are the popular words.
I can move to the next one.
Okay, now we'll move on to the next question. The second question is, what type of media do you think is the most effective in preserving personal memories for future generation? First, photographs, videos. Second, written journals or autobiographies, oral traditions or verbal accounts, virtual environments, or social media. It seems like currently photographs are the most popular answer.
No AI option.
There's no AI. I think we have received most of the votes. So photographs and videos is the most popular one, and the written accounts is the second popular one. Okay, now move on to the question number 3. If you could communicate with someone you've lost, what would you want to tell them? I will remember you. Okay, I see that a lot of people saying, I love them, I love you, I miss them. Okay, after this question, we're gonna move on to open Q&A. We'll have mic in the middle of this hall. So if you have any questions, please jump in. Okay. Any questions?
Any questions from the audience? You can come here.
Hi, it's really nice to hear these panelists. My name is Qing. I'm a master's student from UPenn, and after listening to the Telepresence, is really excited. But I do have like 2 questions to ask the panelists. The first thing is, I think you mentioned one of the media right now, I think mostly is the video. So I wonder, there's a pool, but I'm thinking like how do you envision in the future what the media will be looks like for accomplishing the Telepresence? Because I think video probably just for right now, but in the future there's more technologies and how we can actually interact. And also the second question is, I'm curious, because I think we mentioned that we need to remember the past, but I think normally people wouldn't think of the past until one day they kind of realize there's something very important in the past. So how we capture this timely? I think that's the 2 questions. Thank you.
That is a very important open question. We are sitting in these rooms, table, object, pen. Everything we interact can capture certain memory, and also could record it or replay but it's very, very challenging, technically, also conceptually. I wish we could show the mirror fugue video, but the mirror fugue is a very good example because player piano that the Xiao Xiao used, so it can record the ghostly player, then key actually move it. Also, she added the projection mapping. So piano is self-contained, memorize what ghost player played, also replay. Then you can sit. So this is one of the rare opportunity of the I/O conscient musical instruments. We are also excited that Yamaha, our long collaborators, created the cello. Cello can capture all the movement of the strings, then also actuator to recreate almost same vibration. By doing so, this is cherished by leukemia through video, but can really as if play because cello itself has a memory. But both cello and the piano is very limited, so I really want to expand this variety of different medium which are really working hard. So that is a very important open question which I want to share with HCI community, design community, to think about what kind of medium might be really good to give a illusory communication. Why piano is important is a duet. Even pre-recorded play, you can do a duet. Duet really give an illusion as if I'm communicating, collaborating, also huge satisfactions. So that the hope we can find more those kind of medium or instruments, could be tangible or virtual, ambient or AI. So that's my wishes.
I want to add to your second question about how people get triggered to remember things from the past. And actually, I'm going to answer the question that I refused to answer in the beginning of why we want to remember. I think for me that there are actually two quite different, really compelling reasons for me personally. One is this learning from history thing. So maybe you guys heard of Principles, Ray Dalio. I'm listening to the audiobook of it, and he talks about, so Bridgewater investment finance guy, and he talks about doing these systematic studies of the markets, the world's market in different contexts, in different situations, looking at economic bubbles, crashes, and then approaching governments and kind of advising them and being able to kind of predict when something not so great is going to happen before it happens because of this whole wealth of data that we have. And so we can think of this sort of like studying patterns from history on different scales, like in different domains. It could be like geopolitics, it could be even our own personal patterns and kind of learning from patterns, having more awareness of it. And then on the other side, there's this more like experiential thing that Hiroshi kind of alluded to, and maybe my project plays with. And maybe for me, the core of it is maybe evoking this sort of expansiveness, right? Of like, I don't know, sometimes we're so stuck in things. And I think to be able to feel a grand continuity beyond our individual lives, beyond this moment, beyond our lifespans, yet still completely living this moment. I think there's something really precious and something really deeply human in this.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hello, my name is Alina. I'm from India, from Paris, Université Paris-Saclay. Thank you very much for your answers. I wanted to ask you if you think that projecting the past can rewrite the memories of people that they already have about a particular moment, or if this can be used like to manipulate the memories or the values of people. Because, for example, once I participated in someone else's experiment where we had to look at the shelf with objects, and then we had to take a picture then a machine changed the picture, changed the objects on this picture, and we had to look at this picture for a week. And then I realized that I couldn't remember which objects were really on the shelf and which were added afterwards. So they kind of manipulated my memory. So what do you think, like, preserving the past in a way that we talked about today can actually change, like, the memory of people? Thank you.
Exactly, that's really important. We actually had a paper at CHI last year on that topic called synthetic human memories, when AI manipulate the object, and we empirically show in a large-scale experiment how that mechanism sort of influence people's memories. And we present both positive use case, like how do we reframe traumatic memory for, to help people with PTSD, but also show that it can be used as, the next kind of dangerous version of fake news. So fake memory is really, really dangerous. So I think the question, how do we use it for good and not for the negative outcome? I think that's still something that needs to be researched in the future, but it's something that is so important, especially the work that connect with not just personal memories, but collective memories as well. Yeah.
Right, next question.
I guess my question is kind of related to the previous question. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm from Korea. When we were talking about like designing for remembering, I think I was kind of reminded. Well, it's kind of different, but like the paradox Theseus' ship. So like when you try to replace things like slowly time after time, like is it still the same? So I was thinking like, what if like we start what if we start like remembering again, like by like using like photographs or other like ways? I was thinking like, do you think if the memory still remains the same or not? Yeah.
Okay, we really have time for only one more question, and you can come forward after the panel to discuss.
I think this is such a great panel because I think it's this technology-driven. Oh, sorry, Eric Pauls from UC Berkeley. It's technologically driven, but it's so poetic and so philosophical at the same time. I think that's why it resonates with so many people here. My question is really like in this design language, what you're trying to do, there's this kind of challenge because it still feels like memory should fade in some way, right? Like you kind of talked about that. And I wonder if you have any insights into how they would fade. For example, I mean, just would it be much longer in time? Would I set my personal date for when I want to be completely gone? Would I have like an archival lock mode? So if maybe an archaeologist like thousands of years from now wants to interrogate me, but maybe my family or loved ones wouldn't be able to keep asking questions about personal things, or would maybe just general technical knowledge be available? I'm just kind of curious your thoughts across that kind of spectrum of how memories probably need to fade a little bit because it's just human nature to not have all people all the time at full resolution. That's a little overwhelming.
Yes, that's an amazing idea. That's a good idea for CHI 2027. So hopefully people will think more about this topic. And Hiroshi, any thought on that?
I think there's a lot of the profound question. Remembering is important, but also forgetting is important. Also, memory has to crystallize. Otherwise, trauma may really make life very difficult. Also, losing something, at that point, you have to stop grieving, then move forward. I had a chance to talk to Buddhists, maybe several people, but the Buddhism have very clear schedule. How long you should cry, how should you lament, then when you should really move forward, for example. It's very difficult having this kind of plan. But beyond loved one, we lose so many things. But also at certain age, you really cherish those memories, so that we want to bring back something. For example, Eric and both in this community for many, many years. But when we give a really dynamite talk, you want to remember that moment, that bring back energy when we are almost close to the end. So there are many scenarios which I want to explore. So interactive scenario is so important. Also medium, now we can more do because so many digital media captures. But the meaningful interaction design is still very challenging. But I still like music bottles having a voice of somebody. Also, Natalie Jemijenko's voice box. So there might be some interesting interface, but also contents. So hope we can continue to discussing. Yeah.
Okay, so as we come to the end of this panel, we would like to invite Professor Hiroshi Ishii to share his final remarks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I really appreciated this opportunity, and I thought a lot, what does the Telepresence really means? But maybe one of the conclusions, we are made of the memory of the encounters, many people who we met or we never met because before my life, or we never meet because after my life. So I think I came to believe that we can really deepen our bonds across time itself, which also lost loved ones, our former selves, childhood, or our ancestors, or history, culture, object, which lost in the history. And I think across time is a very important dimension to think about, because absence becomes a new form of the presence and the resource and the opportunities. So what one felt is completely gone, distance, but still by remembering, you feel them much closer. Even you feel you can reach if you extend there. That's a good way to really reconnect bond to loved one you lost. Could be your grandparents or friends who lost lives. And also, in a more deeper way, I think Telepresence expands our capacity to care, to remember, and also to see ourselves as a part of longer human arcs. Because we are not single existence, but parents, history, students, friends, but also Kai community really matters. Kai community really shaped us, all of us, learning from each other. So many papers get rejected, but also opportunity to get the feedback. So I think longer human arc is very important. So it becomes living medium, stretching across generations, and weaving fragments of identity to the continuity. So I thought extending our imagination across in time seems very important to understand how much we owe this community or the past, but also what we can return to the future. So I'm very excited about having this opportunity about the Telepresence across space to across time. So thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you all for being here with us today. If you would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. Here are our contact emails. And we hope these ideas stay with you beyond this session and into the workshop and perhaps another panel next year. Thank you.